Welcome to LifeBlood. This is George G, and the time is right. Welcome to today's guest, strong and powerful Sara Church. Sara, are you ready to do this?
Yeah, George, let's do this.
Let's go. Sara is the author of Mending My Mind. It's a book about how she healed and retrained her mind from the PTSD she developed growing up in an impossible environment, going on to become a successful biotech executive. Sara, we're excited to have you on. Tell us a little bit about your personal life, some more about your work, and what motivated you to write the book.
Yeah, thanks, George. I really appreciate you having me in this conversation. The most important thing about me in my life is that I have a 2-year-old son. So that's absolutely, for any parents out there, the priority. And then, obviously I work in biotech as well. Wrote, the book we're going to chat about, and I like to spend, a lot of time doing outdoor activities and traveling and just having a really kind of active, life. So that's just a little bit about me.
Excellent. I appreciate that. We have a 5 and a 2-year-old, so I both empathize and celebrate all of your experiences with you.
Yeah. I learned more from being a parent than any other life experiences that I've had.
Yeah. So try to gently make a shift to your experiences growing up as a child. I don't know how much you want to share, but would love to just tell us a little bit about your experience and what motivated you to really write the book.
Yeah, sure thing. I'm happy to give a little context. So I grew up in a single parent household where my mom worked very hard to make ends meet. There was a period of my childhood where there was a lot of substance abuse in my home, and just some instability. I wouldn't say a lack of love by any stretch of the imagination. But when I was a 13-year-old, I witnessed a crime happen, a shooting. And the way that I dealt with things was by overachieving and just leaving the past in the past. And my definition of strength at the time was just, one foot in front of the other and not thinking about anything negative. And because of that, it served me well for a long time. I ended up going to, college, to grad school. I have a really rewarding career. On, paper, life looked fantastic. I was married to a great person, had just bought a new house, really enjoyed my career. Enjoyed my friendships. Things really, seemed to be good. And then around the time I turned 40, some challenges broke through the surface, regular challenges we all deal with. The company, the startup biotech I worked for got acquired. My wife and I were not sure about having kids or not, and we had just relocated from Los Angeles to Seattle, so regular stuff. But those things I had trouble coping with. And so the way I coped with it is how I always did. And that was by avoiding things like difficult emotions, difficult conversations. And I got overwhelmed and literally kind of just walked out of my marriage and into an Airbnb to take some space and try to figure out what was going on, which led me down a journey of, seeking help from a therapist and ultimately to a trauma specialist, which really kind of helped me unpack a lot of things. And then, ultimately, the journaling I did throughout a 3-year journey. I got diagnosed with PTSD, actually CPTSD, which is a subtype. And kind of that healing journey was a lot of it was documented in my journal, and ended up writing a book about it. So that's kind of the full backstory.
Well, I appreciate that. And as I'm listening, I think that we all intellectually know leaving things in the past, probably not a recipe for success, and just coping through avoidance, probably also not a recipe for success, yet it's something that I think that we all do.
Yeah, totally. In fact, I certainly did it. I see other people do it and were rewarded for it. So in my case, I was, a workaholic. There'd be days that I'd put in a 12-hour day, and then sitting at dinner, I would be on my phone or thinking about work and not present with my spouse. And there are different ways that, and I was using overwork as a way of not dealing. Some people use food, or some people use, excessive exercise. Some are things that are deemed positive um, by society, and so we're actually, rewarded for, not dealing with things. Or I certainly was.
I've been spending a good amount of time. I don't know if it lined up with the pandemic or it just happened to line up with the pandemic, but just thinking about um, the patterns that we have, because we all have them. Some do serve us, certainly. Some serve us outwardly, like working my butt off. That's great for my career, but maybe not good for every other aspect of my life. And some are clearly destructive. If I'm an alcoholic or if I'm a drug addict, then that's a pattern and a habit, but it's not serving me. Um, you mentioned journaling. You mentioned working with a professional. I don't know if he's a therapist, but to help you with this, how did you how did that whole process start? I'm fascinated by being able to recognize a pattern and then getting rid of it and replacing it, or how all that works.
Oh yeah, yeah, totally. And a lot of this actually did involve kind of analyzing and dismantling patterns and building new habits for me. Um, so essentially, there was a little trial and error finding kind of the right therapist, because I needed a trauma specialist to deal with some traumatic things. And quite frankly, according to the CDC, 61% of us had a traumatic childhood experience
Hmm.
that can be impacting us, that could literally impact our nervous system or brain development, and can impact us for decades to come. So my story is, sadly not very uncommon. And so I do think it relates to a lot of people. And for me, with the guidance of a licensed therapist, specialized in what I was working through, the first activity she had me do was write a timeline of significant events, positive and negative, in my life. And based on that, so that was my first writing. It was the very first kind of homework assignment she gave me. And so with that, in all of these significant events, there are patterns within those. So for example, there'd be themes. Well, here are my relationships. Like in my 20s and 30s, I had long-term relationships with fantastic, great people. Luckily my chooser was good. So, I was with great people, and I had a pattern of essentially kind of when things got tough, just being like, we're done, and walking away. And so, through this work, I was able to figure out some themes in my life, and then we kind of dissect some of those and get insights.
I can see where, just going through a timeline of significant events, how it's it's it sounds like a pretty simple exercise, but so profound to sort of point to what really I think are the significant events, and what makes those significant, and you sort of trace it back. Fascinating. How hard was it? You strike me as a really strong person. To What was it that sort of pushed you over the edge to actually meet with a therapist?
Yeah, I had spent, until I had met, my wife, my 20s and the first half of my 30s, really just responsible for myself and the work I do with colleagues on behalf of patients. And so, even though I had long-term relationships, I'd never made a serious commitment. And so it was the first time I actually made a very serious commitment with a wonderful person. And the fact that when things got hard, I just kind of walked away from that. Now there was someone else who was hurt that I made a promise to. And I just wasn't, I felt terrible about it. It just wasn't the person I wanted to be. So I decided I need to figure out what's going on here instead of just, filling my days up and keeping myself, busy. Like I really had to take a look in the mirror. And so that was the wake up call. And then once I did and took the time, like I think a lot of us have done, through COVID as well, is once I took the time to look in the mirror and reflect, there were some things I really needed to change to really have not only overcome PTSD, but to really live the life I wanted to live, to feel really fulfilled, connected to myself, connected to other people, to be the person I want to be in the world. And so I just, that was my catalyst. But that's what led me on a journey with kind of twists and turns, trying to kind of figure all this out.
I appreciate that. Is it different for everybody? Do we overcome trauma? Do we get rid of it? Do we live with it?
Yeah, that initially kind of when I saw, the therapist, that this is all she's done for many, many years, and, has a PhD. She's very good at what she does. I was like, I just want to get rid of this and kind of get back to my life. Like, okay, I had some of these like really hard, scary experiences when I was little, but that was then. Like, help me just fix it so I can go on my way. And what I learned going through that, and it took me a couple of years, is I couldn't just get rid of it. It was like part of the fabric that makes me, but I could transform it. And so, for me, there were two things I had to do to really become what I'd call like an emotionally mature person, that's, overcome trauma, because trauma affects us emotionally. For me, I like to shut my emotions down. Other people can have really strong reactions like anger and those sorts of things. Not to say that I've never had angry reactions, but my default was more to avoid emotions and shut down. So I had to learn to do two things: allow myself to feel all of my emotions, even the emotions I labeled bad, and then two, then I have to learn, now that I'm letting myself feel all these emotions, then I have to learn to kind of manage them. And then in some cases, even, and this is where the transformation comes in, sometimes you can actually harness emotions and it can add to your power. And so, yeah, so I had to learn to feel and manage emotions. And I still, make mistakes or don't handle my emotions as well as I'd want to. At times, like, I'm not perfect at it. But at least I'm like connected to them, regularly now, and feeling like a really emotionally kind of whole person. So yeah.
Fascinating, right? It's when you start to engage in this process and you say, okay, I can totally see you, even though I don't know you very well, Sarah. I just met you 20 minutes ago. I could see you walking into this office and say, okay, is there a script or is step by step so I can just get kind of done with this and go on my way? And the person was like, no, sit down, it's going to take a long time. And you're like, okay.
So totally. I asked her the first appointment, how long will this take? And she raised her eyebrows at me. I'm like, let's just get it done.
Let's get started. So allowing yourself to feel all these emotions. And I mean, that's sort of a wild thing to say. If like if for people who are listening and say, well, how do you not feel emotions? But if you become really, really, really good at compartmentalizing things, then you don't. And so that's a whole new skill set that you've had to learn. So I imagine, yeah, you're not perfect at it after, a handful of years.
Yeah. And we're all humans and all have, these emotions, and some common ways people don't feel emotions. And I wasn't aware that I wasn't allowing myself to, feel all of my experiences. What would happen is I'd be like, I'm feeling kind of, I don't know, could be down. I'm just going to go for a run. Like, right. It's something as simple as that. And a lot of that's positive. But there's an extent where we do it too much, and it could be alcohol. On the flip side, I've met some people who've work through trauma, and they used to use alcohol or substances to not feel. For me, I'd be like, oh, I don't like what I'm feeling. Let me do something else to distract myself. And I just kind of was lying to myself in a way, because I'm like, well, I'm doing positive things. I'm running. I'm just going to go shift my attention to work. But the way I was doing it was avoidance. But it's hard to even know sometimes if you're not wanting to deal with stuff. It's tricky.
Yeah, I think that it strikes me that just being aware of it, and then to recognize, okay, I am irritated or frustrated, whatever it is, and then to start to trace maybe back to what was it that really triggered that, recognizing that, and then putting in place a healthy coping mechanism.
Yeah. So there's, for me, I can only speak for me, and I think you made this point or alluded to it earlier. It's individual for everyone. I'll give one example. Since we're both parents, I have a fantastic nanny, and sometimes she was showing up 15, 20 minutes late, and I kept feeling this anger. But she's great, like vetted, got her through an agency, everything so good. And I was like, why do I feel this much anger at her, being late? Like, I could just set the start time 15 minutes earlier, and kind of the old me would be like, whatever, like, but I paused and traced it back, and spent a few minutes kind of sitting with it. And my fear, was about reliability with the care of my child. And so in this case, I did decide to set I was able to, look at it, turn it around in my mind and analyze it. I'm like, wow, he's not at risk for anything. I could set the start time back 15 minutes earlier. However, anger is an alert system. So it could tell us that, a boundary is being violated, or we're at risk, or we need to react or do. It's a very activating, powerful, useful emotion. So, and so I chose to just, I guess, cope or change by changing her start date. But it could have been alerting me to a serious, threat of the safety of my child. And that wasn't true in this case. But we want to know we want to take a minute to see what our emotions trying to inform us of, and then kind of decide, from a centered place, how we want to respond to that. So all emotions do have use to us.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. All the emotions that pop up, it could be signaling danger. It could just be that I'm tired in a bad mood, but being able to recognize and explore. And I mean, it is have you always been a person, or do you trust your gut? Do you trust your intuition?
Yeah, I when it's really clear to me, it's led me to really good places. Sometimes it's hard to know what my gut's saying. And for me, I found 3 decision centers in my body. Like, one's the thoughts in my brain. So that's a source of information. Another is kind of what my heart's feeling. And then I have this gut that's lower in my body, obviously in the gut area. And so they all kind of signal information to me. But the challenging point or part is like cutting through kind of the noise and trying to get kind of clear information. And so kind of me holistically as a person, I need to take inputs from my heart, my head and my gut, and try to make good decisions from those. But a few times in my life, I've had very strong, clear gut where there's no thoughts in my head, and they're just crystal clear. Take this course of action, like, for example, take this job. I've had a gut feeling towards taking a position at a startup, which was a risk, and it really panned out in a very meaningful, rewarding, positive way. So when the gut's crystal clear to me, I definitely follow it.
Nice. I love how you have the 3 decision centers and smart. I love it. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people learn more about you? Where can they get a copy of Mending My Mind?
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me, George. There's just 2 resources to direct people to. CPTSD.org, which was a site I got a lot of resources and information on my journey. And then my website's sarachurch.org, and it has all the books and different things I read that were useful to me, as well as information about my books on my site as well.
Excellent. Well, if you enjoyed this much as I did, show Sarah your appreciation and share today's show with a friend who also appreciates good ideas. Go to, Sarah, is it cptsd.org?
Uh-huh.
Excellent. cptsd.org and sarachurch.org. It's sarchurch.org, and pick up a copy of Mending My Mind. Thanks again, Sarah.
Thanks so much, George. I really appreciate it.
And until next time, keep fighting the good fight. We are all in this together.